He must have looked funny standing there in that aisle. It was 1985 or so in my small hometown in western Kansas. It's the kind of town where everyone seems to know everyone else, which is especially true in his case, since he was a sheriff's officer, not exactly shy. People knew him or they knew of him, so even if he'd walked into the Dillons on Vine Street in jeans and a t-shirt, they'd notice. Instead, he stood in that aisle, likely wearing a bulletproof vest under his polyester uniform shirt, with a holster strapped around his waist and a badge pinned above his pocket. With his Tom Selleck mustache and his shock of bright red hair, he didn't exactly fit in the health and beauty section, much less the feminine care aisle. I can still see him now in my mind, as I imagine he looked then. His left thumb hooked inside his pants pocket, the other probably alternately scratching his cheek and cupping his chin. He still does that now, too, even though it's almost 30 years later. It's one of his deep in thought gestures, like doodling as he talks, sketching out details of a story as he speaks them. I imagine the look that must have washed over his face as he stood there, surveying the dizzying array of options, light, medium, heavy, mini, maxi, scented, unscented, and probably wondered why things are never simple with women. Having teenage girls as a single dad couldn't have been easy. When my parents first divorced, we followed tradition and stayed with our mom. I still remember the first night he picked the three of us up for his night after he'd moved out of our house on Marjorie Drive. We sat, waiting on the couch in the living room. The bell rang, and I remember thinking how odd it was that kids and friends and family traipsed in and out of our house all day without ringing the bell, but our dad, was asking for permission to come in. He didn't come in, not past the threshold anyway. I remember how he was dressed, one of those 70s-looking button-down shirts that I rarely saw him wear, hair combed and looking like he did for church, which I also thought was odd. I always saw him in work clothes, which were usually streaked with paint and splattered with putty. When he wasn't on duty, he juggled part-time jobs to take care of everyone. But that night was special. He took us out for dinner and to the one and only movie I've ever seen with him in a theater, Splash. I remember Tom Hanks and Daryl Hannah, but what I remember more is that he bought us popcorn. It was almost like a party, but of course it wasn't really happy. It was just the beginning of our new normal. We moved with my mom from place to place, but he was always the constant in my chaos. Even after working the 11 to 7 shift, 11 at night to 7 in the morning, not the other way around, he would pull into the driveway of whichever place Mom had decided to call home to pick me up and take me to school. After I climbed up into the passenger seat of his embarrassingly huge and obnoxiously loud yellow Blazer and closed the door, he'd hand me a tinfoil-covered styrofoam plate, the inside rimmed with drips of condensation and the center filled with pancakes or eggs or both. He knew without ever having walked into the kitchen of Mom's place that the only thing in our fridge was probably Mountain Dew and eggs no one would cook. Eventually, we went to live with him. When I was young, I didn't realize just how challenging it must have been for a divorced man to buck the trend and fight for custody of 3 girls. It was common practice to automatically grant favor to the mother in custody issues. Traditional wisdom says that kids belong with their mother. A traditional mom would have gone to Dillon's for her daughters. Mine didn't, but he did. Webster's defines the noun mother simply as a female parent. For a title so charged with emotion, it's a surprisingly sterile and succinct definition. A parent is defined as someone who begets or brings forth offspring. It's the birth certificate and the shared physical characteristics. My red hair from him, my prominent nose from her. I've inherited both, without choosing either. Dictionary.com defines mothering as a transitive verb, to acknowledge oneself as the author of, to assume as one's own, to care for, to protect. What a difference between the noun and the verb. Tack on 3 little letters and the willingness to shop for Kotex between traffic stops and drug busts, and you can change a life. The verb is everything we imagine and hope for the noun to be. It encompasses acceptance, family, nurturing, and love. The verb has nothing to do with biology or body parts, but everything to do with heart. It's the tough love conversations, the moments before he walks you down the aisle, and the shoulder you lean on during your own divorce. The verb is bucking convention, rewriting tradition, and stepping up to answer the tough questions, like the difference between Minnie and Maxie.